The numbers game in Florida, a boost for Bush from the overseas absentee ballots, a lift for Gore from recounts by hand, and some angry accusations from the Republican camp.
We now have clear and compelling evidence from eyewitnesses that this manual recount process is fundamentally flawed.
The current president's visit to Vietnam and the effort to help an MIA's family find closure.
We believe we owe them and all Americans like them what they came here for, a chance finally to take their father home.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News, reported by John Siegenthaler.
Good evening, everyone. The spotlight remains on Florida tonight as the country waits for the final results in the race for president. Today, George W. Bush extended his lead over Al Gore. After counting the overseas absentee ballots, Bush is now ahead by 930 votes. The overseas ballots broke for Bush by a 2-to-1 margin. Still, the hand recount continues in counties like Palm Beach, where Gore continues to pick up votes. Whether they will actually be included in the final total could be determined by the Florida Supreme Court on Monday. But today, the Bush campaign launched a new attack on the hand recount, claiming widespread irregularities. We begin our coverage with NBC's Kelly O'Donnell in Tallahassee tonight. Good evening, Kelly.
Good evening, John. A series of new attacks from the Bush campaign tonight. Allegations that the ongoing hand recount can't be trusted, and claims that Democrats specifically and intentionally targeted military overseas ballots for disqualification.
The high mileage votes, cast in faraway places by Americans living abroad, but many not counted in Florida.
Ballot number 26 is date stamped November the 9th in the supervisor's office. Is that correct?
More than a third of the overseas absentee ballots rejected. 1,400 plus disqualified for things like missing or late postmarks required by Florida law. So great a number, there were more ballots rejected than counted for either candidate, prompting allegations from Bush supporters that Democrats aggressively went after military votes, looking for ways to exclude them.
The vice president's lawyers have gone to war, in my judgment, against the men and women who serve in our armed forces, in an effort to win at any cost.
Today, Republican operatives circulated a memo written by and for Democrats monitoring the vote count. A 5-point list of suggestions on how to protest by looking at signatures and postmarks with this kind of advice. A challenge must be made prior to the time that the ballot is removed from the mailing envelope. But Democrats counter that Republicans passed out guidelines for their representatives too. And Gore supporters say their advocates followed Florida law.
That Democrats don't have the final say in what ballots were accepted and what ballots were rejected. Locally elected Florida officials do. Democrats and Republicans, people who work in the state.
Among the most dramatic examples, heavily Democratic Broward County, which includes Fort Lauderdale, 92 ballots accepted, 304 rejected. More Republican Orange County, 30 accepted, 117 set aside. And Miami-Dade, 103 accepted, more than double, 209 disqualified.
Doesn't sit well with me because if the Democrats are so concerned about the voters' intent and making every vote count, certainly our military men who are serving this country deserve that same opportunity.
Now, Democrats say that a substantial number of those rejected ballots belong to Americans abroad who are not in the military, and also claim that the harsher tone from Republicans today really amounts to campaign mode that ends up insulting the local vote counters who are just working hard to finalize the results. John?
NBC's Kelly O'Donnell in Florida. Kelly, thank you. What does this harsh new tone signal? With their candidates tonight, NBC's Campbell Brown and Chip Reed. Campbell, what can you tell us about the Bush game plan?
Well, John, the accusations made by the Bush campaign today are more than just talk. Evidence is being collected now for a possible lawsuit. In Austin, Texas today, Governor Bush kept a low profile, leaving the mansion for a trip to the office and an afternoon workout. But at campaign headquarters not far away, his advisors were on the offensive, accusing the Democrats of improper activities during the hand recounts. The allegations? Counters taping chads to ballots. Bush ballots put in Gore piles, and overall mishandling of the ballots, counters sticking Post-it notes on them and using the ballots to fan themselves.
We now have clear and compelling evidence from eyewitnesses that this manual recount process is fundamentally flawed and is no longer recounting, but is distorting, reinventing, and miscounting the true intentions of the voters of Florida.
The campaign says eyewitnesses have signed affidavits attesting to what they've observed. Evidence advisors say may bolster their legal fight to stop the hand counts. Republican governors holding their annual meeting in Florida today rallied behind Bush and joined the chorus crying foul.
If they're going to steal the election, we should put the right face on it. And when it gets stolen from us, we ought to know it.
Now, part of what the Bush campaign is trying to do is discredit the hand counts with the American public, but these are also the same arguments they will lay out for a Florida judge on Monday. John?
NBC's Campbell Brown with the Bush campaign. Campbell, thank you. NBC's Chip Reid is in Washington with Vice President Gore. Good evening, Chip.
Good evening, Tim.
What's the response to those accusations?
Well, they say that the accusations are, not surprisingly, absolutely false. They say this process is so open to public inspection. If anything like that were going on, everybody would be able to see it right there on TV. They also say that this is a sign of increasing desperation on the part of the Bush camp. Why? They say it's because the Gore camp is right, and the Bush camp is slowly coming to the realization that they're right, that the Gore camp is going to get at least 1,000 additional votes from these manual recounts, possibly as many as 1,500. That would be enough to put Gore on top. Now, the trick, of course, is to get those votes included in the final tally. How do they do that? They have to go to the Supreme Court and get it done. So Warren Christopher and the rest of the legal team are down in Tallahassee working very hard, some of them around the clock. Warren Christopher today didn't even have time to stop and talk to reporters except to tell them he's too busy to stop and talk. They filed that brief, about 62 pages in the Supreme Court. They think their chances of prevailing and having those votes ultimately included are very good. John?
I understand the Vice President is headed back to Nashville, Tennessee. Tell us why.
Well, he was supposed to go back to Nashville tomorrow night for a conference on Monday, the 10th annual conference. It's a family conference, a conference on family issues. He really wanted to do it, but he now thinks it's going to be too much of a distraction with all the controversy around the election, and it will turn it into a circus down there. I think they're also afraid it will take him away from his command post here at the vice presidential residence. John?
All right. NBC's Chip Reid in Washington. Chip, thanks. There was recounting by hand today in 2 Florida counties, with a combined total of 1 million voters. NBC's Jim Avila is in Palm Beach County. Jim Cummins is in Broward to the south. Jim Avila, what's going on there?
Well, John, Palm Beach, of course, is one of the wealthiest places on earth, and the Democrats think it's rich with votes as well. In fact, Al Gore hopes to center his recount comeback right here in Palm Beach County, while Republicans are hoping to document what they say is a pattern of tampering and sloppiness that they hope they'll be able to put before a court and stop this vote from ever becoming official. TV cameras, even the public watch. Every vote counted in full view. But today, as if on cue, immediately after that Bush campaign news conference, Republican observers emerged to make accusations about rampant human error and worse.
We have found Bush votes ready to be counted as Gore votes.
But individual counters interviewed before the GOP made those high-profile charges told NBC News the system, while slow, is working.
We cannot cause mischief.
Tanya Davis Johnson back for her second shift today as a Democratic counter.
There's no room for mischief. Your hands are on top of the table at all time. There's no objects at our stations to poke through or to change a vote.
In fact, in Palm Beach County, the actual counters and observers make no judgment calls at all. Their job, simply look for cleanly punched ballots with no hanging chads. Put those in either a Bush or Gore pile and move on. Any ballots with swinging, hanging, dimpled, or otherwise controversial chads are put in a separate pile for the election canvassing board to decide upon later. Before the Bush campaign allegations, this Republican counter was asked if she saw opportunities for tampering.
4 people are looking at every single card front and back.
Green Party observer June Bracheris, neither a Gore nor Bush supporter, says she witnessed no skullduggery.
If you stand too near a stack of ballots, people will tell you to step back. So I haven't seen anything as far as tampering or being rough with the ballots.
Palm Beach's canvassing board is all Democrat, but the local judge who doubles as chairman is a Jeb Bush appointee.
The spin out here is too much, so I just wanted to come out and tell you all, I really think everything's going pretty well.
Nearly 1/4 of the votes here in Palm Beach have now been hand counted in this recount. However, there are no results yet because those big piles of controversial ballots with hanging chads have yet to be counted. John?
NBC's Jim Avila. Jim, thanks. Now to NBC's Jim Cummins, who is in Broward County. Jim?
John, so far, about 1/3 of the 588,000 votes in this Democratic Party stronghold have been recounted by hand. And Al Gore has gained an additional 59 votes.
That's only for this year.
Today, the turnout of county workers, Democrats and Republicans, was much larger than expected for a Saturday.
If your name is on here as an attorney, you can go in right now.
Soon, they were sitting at long tables, ignoring the large screen TVs nearby, but concentrating on those punch cards, looking for that dangling chad that might help decide who will be the next president. 2 county workers handle the ballots, while 1 Republican and 1 Democrat observe in each group. Democrat Georgia Foster, who lives in Broward County, says this can be tedious and boring, but she's convinced it's her civic duty to be here.
I think you have to be able to concentrate, and you think about the importance of it, so it's really not tiresome for me.
Republican campaign worker Sonia Medina, who traveled here from Washington, D.C., considers this to be a complete waste of time.
I've been sitting in office for the past, 8 months or so, working really hard for this campaign, and it's rather disappointing that I'm having to be here, paying attention to every little chad.
Those chads. All the observers are looking for cards with dangling chads attached on 1 or 2 corners. Those will become votes. 3 corners and dimples don't count, but 6,600 of those cards have been set aside in case the Democrats win a court fight to count them. All of this is now important to these 2 strangers who never dreamed they would spend days just staring at punch cards.
It's a new experience.
Would you do it again?
Yeah, I think it's important.
Honestly, I don't think I would do it again.
But they do agree on one thing.
There's been a lot of people who complain about who's in office and who didn't do whatever they were supposed to do, but a lot of them didn't vote. And so now they see that it's really important to vote, that 1 vote counts.
Indeed it does, and the people heading up this campaign hope to have all those votes recounted by hand by late Monday. John?
NBC's Jim Cummins in Plantation, Florida. Jim, thank you. When NBC Nightly News continues, a live report from Tallahassee on the legal strategies in this battle for the White House. On Monday, almost 2 weeks after Election Day, the Bush and Gore legal teams will face off in the Florida State Supreme Court. That's where NBC's Dan Abrams is tonight. Good evening, Dan.
Well, good evening, John. It all comes down to this. Over 100 pages of legal briefs filed by the Gore team and the county canvassing boards. The Bush team and the Secretary of State will file tomorrow. The court is really considering 2 questions. First, when is a manual recount appropriate? Florida law says when there is, quote, an error in the vote tabulation which could affect the outcome of the election. What qualifies as an error? The Gore team says the recounts should continue, and they argue the statute provides a remedy for any type of mistake made in tabulating ballots. But the Bush team says that sort of mistake isn't enough. They say you need more. You need a mistake in the way that those votes were tabulated, more than simply discovering votes later. Issue number 2, can the Secretary of State reject those manual recounted votes? The Gore team, in characterizing the Secretary's approach as Kafkaesque, say no. In this circumstance, the Secretary has no discretion at all to refuse to take into account the results of a manual recount. Well, not so, say the Republicans, who say that the Secretary may, in her discretion, reject any votes that came in after November 14th. John?
But Dan, didn't a lower court say that the Secretary of State has that sort of discretion to reject the votes?
Absolutely, and that's why the Gore team said even if she has that discretion, she abused that discretion. John?
All right, NBC's Dan Abrams in Tallahassee. Dan, thank you. The battle for the White House is the topic tomorrow on NBC's Meet the Press. Gore running mate